you really had so many opportunities to just broaden your worldview and learn about things and be fascinated by the world.
That was P. Segal. I'm Jeff. Welcome to Storied San Francisco, a weekly podcast where San Franciscans from all walks of life share their stories, and you get to know your neighbors. In this podcast, P tells us the story of how her Sicilian family ended up in San Francisco. She takes us through her childhood in the Marina and Outer Sunset neighborhoods, talks about leaving the city to go to college in Los Angeles, and her eventual return to San Francisco in the late 70s. Here's P.
My father came to America from Sicily in 1929. He was on the boat when Wall Street crashed.
Oh, I was going to ask if it had anything to do with that.
He actually had to leave Sicily because he disturbed a midnight mass on Christmas Eve because all the poor people had to kneel on the stone floor and the rich people sat in pews. And so, you offend the Catholic Church in Sicily and you got to go.
Is that excommunication? Is that what it's called?
I don't know if he was ever formally excommunicated, but
is that the term, or am I just making that?
No, it is the term.
Because I was raised Catholic. I've got all that crap in me somewhere. Try not to access it, but
yeah.
Anyway. Okay, that's quite a leaving story.
Yes, so he arrived in New York City, and at that time, Queens was almost entirely Italian. Italian was spoken more on the streets than English. My mother, who was born there from immigrant parents, never actually learned to speak English until she went to school. So I grew up in a very conventionally Italian household.
Do you speak?
I actually did not learn to speak Italian until maybe 15 years ago. And the reason was because there was so much anti-Italian sentiment when my father came to the United States that he said, "You're going to be an American." However, my grandmother, with whom I shared a room for the first 17 years of my life, never learned to speak English. She spoke only Sicilian.
Your mom born where in New York?
In Queens.
Oh, she was also born in Queens. Okay.
Mm-hmm. So when my father got off the boat, he immediately headed for the Italian community. He didn't speak English, so my grandfather owned a bar. And my father went to the bar, and my mother was a barmaid. So they knew each other for many years before he actually asked her to marry him. He actually had a sister in Los Angeles whose husband worked for the film industry. And so, the Italian community being very close-knit everywhere, he asked if there was any work for him in the film industry, and because by then he spoke English and he was a college graduate, so he got a job as a foreign language film dubber. And he actually, would look at the way people were speaking in an American film, replicate the dialogue in Italian with something that actually synced with the lip movements of the actors, and then trained the actors who would do the Italian language version of the dialogue.
So we're talking dubbing.
Yes, dubbing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Or would this have been the 30s, 40s?
40s.
40s, okay.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So he went to L.A. first.
We went to L.A. first.
Okay.
But he was a deeply committed bohemian before he got married. And his carousing pals in L.A. in the film industry decided to drive to San Francisco one weekend for fun. And when he arrived at dawn on a Saturday morning and saw the Golden Gate Bridge, and he said, "That's it, I want to live here." And so he moved here.
You know what year that was?
That would have been 46, 47.
Just after the war.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And he wrote to my mom and asked her to come to California and marry him. So they spent their honeymoon in a hotel at 200 Columbus Avenue.
I love it.
And that's where I was conceived.
Oh, there you go.
In the bay window looking across the intersection at Zoetrope Studios.
Okay. Wow.
And of course, a few years later, City Lights would open on that block.
So you grew up in North Beach, born in, and were you actually born, like, were you born at a hospital or?
Yes, I was born 9 blocks away from here at St. Mary's.
Mm-hmm.
But I did live, and actually, not too long after I was born, my parents moved to the Marina, which was also all Italian at that time, until the 70s.
Wow.
North Beach was extended into the Marina.
So did you grow up more in the Marina?
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Because, for one thing, Italians have a real penchant for being near the water. It's a cultural thing. But, my parents loved the fact that they could walk 2 blocks to the bay.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And, if you lived in North Beach proper, near the commercial district, it was a walk to the bay.
Yeah, too far.
You could see it.
6 blocks is way too far. So how was that growing up in the Marina? Not how was it, but what, you didn't have anything to compare it to, obviously, but what was it? What was it like now, looking back?
Well, once again, back in those days in San Francisco, people knew their neighbors. There would be 2 houses that adjoined in the front at the street, and when you moved back towards the backyards, there was an opening where there were windows looking out over the, little alleyways going back towards the yards. And on summer nights, you'd have your windows open, and your neighbors were sitting at their kitchen table across the little opening, also having dinner. And we had little clotheslines that ran back and forth, and a basket hanging from them, so that we could send our neighbors, some particularly wonderful dish from our dinner.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Like teleportation.
Yeah, when we'd have inter-household conversations over dinner. Yeah.
So cool.
It was.
And were there a lot of kids your age? Did you have a lot of friends in the neighborhood?
There were a lot of kids. Back in those days, every Italian family had kids.
Yeah.
There were lots of us, and we all played in the streets, and nobody was worried about us. Yeah.
No helmets, no pads.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Did you stay there living in that neighborhood through schooling and like high school and whatnot? And what schools did you go to?
I went to Winfield Scott Elementary, and then my family moved out to the Avenues because they finally bought a house. And I went to Hoover there, and then I went to Lowell.
Okay. Where in the Avenues?
16th and Quintera.
Oh, wow, yeah. Outer Sunset.
Yeah. When I grew up in the North Beach community, although we lived in the Marina, which was also all Italian, I went with my father every Saturday to Cafe Trieste. And, he would sit with his Italian middle-class friends in their, silk suits and fedoras and silk pocket handkerchiefs and speak Italian. And I would stare at the people across the room, the scruffy, long-haired, poetry shouting people who would become my friends many years later.
I'm always particularly interested in people's teenage years because I feel like those are fairly formative. And the worst and the best. I mean, it's when you're really starting to at least think that you know stuff. And, starting to dream and starting to get out and figure stuff out. Learn the hard way. Was that the case for you, do you think?
I had my adolescence was terrible because I was under house arrest. My father grew up in Sicily, and so he would never let me out of his sight. I always had to have an adult with me if I left the house.
Okay.
And when I went to Sicily as an adult and got harassed, every quarter block by somebody, I thought, oh my God, this is what my father thought life was like.
Right.
And so I forgave him for, keeping me under house arrest until I was 17. And the only thing that actually enabled me to get away was the fact that I had so much time to do homework that I got lots of scholarships.
Oh, good. Did you like school, or was it?
Oh, I loved it.
Yeah.
I loved it. I've always been an avid reader. And I would say that the system of education when I was growing up was just of higher quality. For example, you learned critical thinking early on.
So learning to think for yourself.
Yes.
Also.
Yes. And it wasn't just, being able to pass standardized tests. It was, how well can you think? How can you, what ideas can you come up with? But also I had a wonderful batch of teachers growing up. Yeah.
So was there anything in high school that you particularly excelled at or liked? Favored, I should say.
Well, I had this wonderful English instructor, and she's probably the one person that convinced me that I should try to be a writer. Her name was Anne Wallach, and she taught, advanced placement English. And I learned more from her than I learned from any of the writing instructors I would have in college.
Interesting.
Yeah. So that seriously helped with the getting the scholarships thing.
Yeah. So did you leave to go to college? You mentioned college.
Yes.
Okay, you left San Francisco.
I left San Francisco. I didn't want to, because when I was growing up here, San Francisco was the most amazing place. I mean, you had the beat poets in North Beach, and you had the music scene in the Haight-Ashbury, and the music scene in the Mission, and there were the great painters at the Art Institute, painters and sculptors at the Art Institute. It was just, a wonderful cultural experience.
Yes.
And the museums were all free. The aquarium and the Hall of Sciences and all these things in the park were free. The tea garden was free. So, you really had so many opportunities to just broaden your worldview and learn about things and be fascinated by the world.
Right.
Without leaving. So it was hard to leave San Francisco.
And I've heard people say getting places like that's one of the biggest changes, is that getting anywhere anymore takes forever, and it can be frustrating and sometimes expensive. So my impression then is that, on the flip side, that it used to be a little easier to get around, a little maybe faster or more relaxing, less annoying, less frustrating.
Almost all the Muni buses ran every 3 minutes.
Mind blown.
I know.
I
know. So, although some of the outlying routes, like the 39 Coit that went to the top of Coit Tower, never ran that often. But, that's...
setting a trend for the rest of Muni for later.
Right.
So did you ride Muni a lot as a kid? Like buses, streetcars?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I don't think... My family didn't even have a car until... I was about 12 or 13 when they finally got a car.
Wow.
Living in the avenues.
Right, where it's more like America. Bigger streets.
Yeah.
All that stuff. Probably fewer buses. Yeah. So you left. So you went to college, even though you didn't want to leave.
Well, when you live in a household where you're not allowed out without an adult, and you've won, a lot of scholarships, and you've been accepted to just about any school you want to go to, well, it gave me the opportunity to leave home. And also my father wouldn't let me have a job because he said, if you have money, you have independence. He said other things to me like, until you get married, you're under my thumb. When you get married, you're under your husband's thumb.
So just, yay, life under thumbs. Oh, I can't wait.
Yeah.
Okay. But so where did you go?
I went to UCLA, and after I got out of Lowell and was thinking about a writing career, I wondered, what kind of writing? And perhaps in some way influenced by my father's history in the film industry, I thought, wow, being a screenwriter is a good way to go because, fewer and fewer people read books, but everybody loves movies. So if you want to, get messages across, maybe the film industry is the best kind of writing. So, so I went to Hollywood, to try my luck after graduation, and I realized that, the screenwriter is, is a part of the whole of creating a film, but in fact, the final film usually shows absolutely no similarity to the screenplay.
Right.
So that was one of the first times I realized that I had chosen the wrong career.
Oh, God.
I've done that repeatedly my whole life. And then a couple of things happened. I turned down a job with Mel Brooks.
Was he already a known entity or at the time? Okay.
Mm-hmm. And he said at the time, I said, I can't do it. I'm leaving for Europe in 3 days. And he said, okay, well, I'll call you next time. But he didn't. Oh. So, and who knew at that young age that some opportunities only come along once in a lifetime and you grab them when they come? Well, I didn't. So.
Did you go to Europe?
I did go to Europe.
Like to live or?
No, I went, I had been arranging a trip to see friends that I knew, through various things in LA, people who had come and stayed with me in LA. And also I wanted to meet my family in Sicily. I'd never met any of them. Although after I went to visit them, one of my aunts did come to two of my aunts and uncles came to visit here. But it was such an amazing experience, and I'd never been to Europe, and I'd spent a year planning it.
Sure.
So
let's talk about moving back. Unless there's anything else important from your time away, you think?
Well, it's all in my memoirs.
Okay, so yeah, everyone go read P's memoir.
Yes.
Okay, so you came back. When was this, and what was, or was the condition that your father passed away?
Yes, and because I grew up in this extremely traditional, old-fashioned household, my mother had never written a check. She had never paid a bill. She had no idea about, all the practical aspects of living without a husband. And so, I wanted to come back and make sure that everything was okay with her. And I lived at the house that they bought in Marina for about a year.
That was P. Segal. Check back Thursday to hear P's story of opening Cafe Proust and her current work getting affordable housing for artists in the city. Music for Storied San Francisco is by Otis MacDonald. Film photography is by Michelle Kilfeather. The show is hosted and produced by me, Jeff Hunt. Our website is storiedsf.com, where you can browse more than 100 episodes, check out all of our live events, and visit our store. Please follow us on Twitter and Instagram, and subscribe to the show on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. If that's Apple Podcasts or iTunes, please do us a favor and rate and review what we do. And if you have any feedback for us or suggested guests, our email is storiedsf@gmail.com. Thanks for listening.